Внимание, внимание! Говорит и показывает Modiphius.
Hi, and welcome to Modiphius Calling, and today we are talking about the Conan role-playing game, and we're going to be focusing on the rules, which is the 2d20 system, which is Modiphius' in-house system, which has also been used for Mutant Chronicles, Infinity, and upcoming games like John Carter. So let's take an in-depth look at the rules, and I'm joined in Nottingham, UK by Nathan Dowdell, and he's the lead system developer for the 2d20 system. Nathan, welcome.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
So tell us briefly about the 2d20 system, just for people who maybe haven't heard of it at all. I mean, it sounds like d20 because it's got d20 in it, but what makes it different from other systems?
There's a definite focus towards fast-paced, kinetic, frantic action and narrative, storytelling elements. It's not a traditional system in a few ways. I think the closest you could compare it to would be the system used by Fantasy Flight Games for their Star Wars RPGs.
Okay, yeah, I've played that one, and I really enjoyed the way you don't have this sort of binary resolution mechanic. It's like, oh, you hit or you missed. It's like, well, you missed, but you also rolled a special symbol, and that means, for example, you didn't hit the guard with your blaster, but you hit a piece of the cornice above his head, and that falls down, and it creates smoke, and you're able to get out of there, or something like that.
Yeah, being able to create more than just the basic pass roll from a dice roll is, it's a valuable tool when you're running a game or when you're playing a game to keep things moving and keep things interesting.
So the 2d20 system has also been used in other games by Modiphius, including Mutant Chronicles and Infinity. How is it going to be different in Conan? Is it going to be roughly the same, or is it with large differences?
The heart of the system, the way you roll the dice, the presence of the use of momentum, those all remain fairly consistent, but it's in the details where we change and tailor each game to, or each version of the rules to the particular setting. So Infinity has a lot of espionage, high-tech thriller type elements to it, as befits that setting. Whereas Conan, there's much more focus on the brutal melees and that kind of pulp action horror. In a lot of ways, it's got similarities with Mutant Chronicles simply because of that pulpy action horror element, the existential evils and Cthulhuid monsters. And that's where I think the 2d20 system can shine here.
And so I guess if we could take a look at the different sort of sections of the rules. Let's start with character development. How do you construct a character? Take us sort of through that process.
Well, for the previous games we've done for Mutant Chronicles and for Infinity, you make choices or randomly roll what faction they're from, what social standing they have, where they were educated, what kind of schooling they had, and what their careers are. And at each stage, that builds up your character a little more. Conan, we're going for something a little bit more open, a little bit more freeform, but you'll still be making those sorts of choices. So what nation your character is from will have an impact on how the character is formed. Not to the point where everyone's a stereotype, every Sumerian is the same, but to the point where there's certain common tendencies. If you're from a culture that favours fighting from horseback, odds are you'll know how to ride.
And are you going to have classes in the game?
It won't be class-based, no. Beyond those basic elements and archetypes, it's free-form, both in terms of spending points on what skills you want, and in terms of advancing your character after that.
And how does the skill system work? I mean, do we have abilities and skills, or how do you structure what your character is able to do in the setting?
The basics of it are essentially three numbers. You've got your attributes, which are the core of your character, your main, how strong and tough you are, how quick you are, and so forth. Your brawn, your agility, your intelligence, and so forth. On top of that, every skill has 2 ratings. Expertise, which is perhaps akin to theoretical knowledge, knowing how to do something from book learning and basic training. And then focus, which is that deeper understanding you only get from doing something for real. You make the test, you have to get equal to or less than your attribute plus your expertise on each d20. Each time you do that, you've scored a success. And you've got to get as many successes as possible, the more the better. Each time you get equal to or less than your focus, you score an additional success. So there's a chance to get more than one success per dice, which helps for getting those particularly difficult tests, or for getting that extra kick on an easy test that you succeeded on really well. Beyond those, there are talents and similar special abilities that can be obtained that give you different ways to hone your skill, to make use of your skill, maybe new options or re-rolling dice on fails or extra benefits when you succeed.
So between like expertise and focus, I mean, I'm trying to think of an example. It's like if I have, for example, like archaeology or something, would focus be more, I need to recall a specific fact, or I need to very carefully dust off like an artifact, and then maybe expertise could be, do I have contacts in a particular area of archaeology?
They're both used at the same time. They're both used at the same time on the roll. So it will be more a case of how are you trying to use it. But focus gives you the opportunity for deeper successes, the possibility of getting more successes. If you've got lots of expertise but no focus, you're never going to get more than one success for each dice you're rolling. If you've got focus, you've got chances to do more than just that basic amount. You might be able to get more information out of something than just the basic training might otherwise allow you.
And then with talents also being put in there, how much forethought do you have to have, like when you're sitting down making your character? How much do you have to think ahead? 5 or 6 games or 6 months later, in order to get your character to where maybe you want it to be? Because I know in some games you really have to start at first level picking, well, I need this because there's prerequisite trees and all that.
That kind of building in advance isn't really required. The talent trees aren't particularly long. At most, the furthest down, you're only been looking at 3 or 4 talents down in a row on a particular branch. And the talents that you can pick up along the way are plenty worthwhile as well. So there is a little bit of that in as much as a system of talent trees will inevitably have, but it's not massive to the degree of some other systems where you have to plan your character's build from day one.
And what about magic? I mean, Conan is not, it depends on which interpretation you read and which game system you're looking at, but Conan, to me, the magic is not the same as it is in, for example, Dungeons & Dragons, which Vancian system I memorize 4 spells in my slots, and I spend them, and then I rest, and I get them back. Tell us a little bit about creating characters that can use magic, and maybe magic's overall role in the setting, I guess.
Magic is a perilous but ultimately rewarding path to go down. It's extremely dangerous to use, especially if you go about it carelessly. And actually obtaining spells and spells and that kind of sorcerer's power is quite difficult in its own right. Lots of the spells require very difficult tests to use and come with severe consequences if you fail them, or even if you make mistakes during the casting. Beyond that, we've made allowances for characters that want to be magical, at least in terms of how they appear to others, but who don't actually want to use out-and-out sorcery. So things like alchemical tricks and particular ways of using skills that might seem magical to others are going to be kind of a second way for would-be sorcerers, particularly if they don't want to take the risk of using an actual spell.
Okay, and what if you want to have, I mean, is there a hard choice, like leaving that aside, the non-magical appearances of magic aside, if you want to use magic, do you have to make the choice, like, I'm going to use magic, therefore it's going to nerf my other abilities, or can you sort of like take a little bit of magic, like I'll have some magic? Like
with any particular area of focus, it's a matter of what you're willing to put into it. So if you want to be a master swordsman, put the experience points into it, put the skill ranks and the talents into it, but everything that you've spent there was an opportunity cost that you could have spent on something else. Magic will be little different in this regard, and if anything else, there may be higher costs on top of that for learning such bizarre and often soul-destroying powers.
Okay, so it's not like it's not like, either magic user or non-magic user.
It's not like you can't wear armor and you can't use a sword if you're a magic user. You can do all those things, but there is still a definite cost in choosing to wield sorcerer's power.
Yeah, I mean, like, ever since I saw Hellboy 2, when the opening scene where you have, like, the elf guy with the spear and he's doing his kata, and it's totally awesome. And, it's like, I've always wanted to play that character. It's like, I want a guy who's really good with a melee weapon, but clearly there's some magic that's imbuing that ability. And I found it difficult in other games to play something like that, but it seems like I could put a lot of points into the spear, but I could also put some points into magic that might help that character with their melee abilities or something.
And as I've said, a lot of magic will come down to knowledge more than actual spells. It's not, going back to the D&D example, it's not that all magic is a spell. There are the abilities I mentioned which might look like magic to outsiders, but part of what defines wizards in various fantasy fantasy settings is that they're knowledgeable and wise rather than the actual power they can wield. Simply knowing things that others don't is a powerful thing in its own right.
Okay, no magic missile though.
No sort of direct attack spells. No, it's always by means of something else.
Let's talk a little bit about the central mechanic of the system, of the D20 system. If you could just take us through what the central mechanic is that is used to resolve tasks and combat tasks, non-combat.
As I mentioned earlier, you've got your attributes and you've got your skill expertise and your skill focus. You take those values for whatever task you're attempting, and you roll at least 2 or more 20-sided dice. Buying extra ones beyond those 20, that basic 2, I'll come to in a moment, but 2 is the bare minimum. Each one that rolls equal to or less than your expertise plus your attribute is a success. Each one that rolls under your focus, equal to or under your focus, is 2 successes. Tasks have a difficulty of between 0 and 5, which determines how many successes you need in order to actually complete that task. It's important that we included 0 just so that the GMs and players know that there are some things that you don't have to bother rolling for. If you manage to get more successes than you needed bare minimum to succeed at the task, every additional success beyond that becomes a resource called momentum, which characters can make use of to succeed better at their tasks, to perform a task faster, to get more information from trying to research or identify something, but simply to improve the way they do things or to take additional actions as they go about their adventures. Or you can save it up and put it into a group resource that everybody in your party can make use of. That can be used for things like buying additional D20s for a skill test, or making an opponent's test more difficult, or recovering a bit of that damage. You get a moment's second win because you've succeeded, because your allies have succeeded and bought you a moment's respite. Lots of options. The limits for momentum are literally just whatever you can imagine and whatever the GM's willing to let you try with it. We've got plenty of examples in the book, but you can take that further as you wish. There is a consequence to some of that. Any dice that you roll that come up as a natural 20 are a complication. That could be an immediate problem that you face there and then, or it could add to the GM's resources for causing you problems further down the line. A complication never means that you fail. It can't cause you to fail, but it causes something inconvenient to happen on top of your success. You might well have loosed more arrows than you thought you did. You might well have struck an opponent but overextended yourself, and now you can't defend yourself as effectively in your before your next turn, or some other minor issue that's still a problem, but it doesn't detract from what you achieved. The GM's resource in Conan, which is referred to as Doom, Infinity is heat. In Mutant Chronicles, it's Dark Symmetry points. Provides the GM with an equivalent to the player's momentum. So it's something that he can use to bolster non-player characters' abilities and you trigger special abilities on powerful monsters and sorceress opponents and things like that. That's generally players' consequences. Through certain NPCs, a particularly mighty foe might turn up and simply add points to Doom straight away. Or how dangerous it is. Or if the player characters are lacking in momentum and haven't got any other way to boost the size of their dice pools to hit those high difficulties, they can choose to add points straight to Doom and get bonus dice back in turn. Essentially, they're acting recklessly or they're taking risky chances. It'll come back to bite them, but they need to take those risks.
Okay, and when they do that, they're adding dice to the Doom pool.
They're adding points to the Doom pool as a consequence. So there's that kind of balance. You've got multiple ways of adding extra dice. So the main two being momentum and Doom. And momentum used for that is kind of teamwork and capitalizing on successes to keep pushing things forward and forward planning and things like that. And then using Doom to get extra dice is taking risks and acting recklessly and striking a balance between acting cautiously and cleverly with momentum and acting recklessly with Doom is kind of where the heart of the system's dynamic comes from.
I can see some really interesting scenarios where a player is maybe rolling poorly and has just said, you know what, no matter what happens, I want to achieve my objective. I'll take the Doom. And then the next turn he said, I'll take the Doom again. And it keeps happening. And I mean, there's got to be some negative consequences, but it might make for kind of a thrilling story.
It can do. And that does kind of drive part of the system. You've got these higher difficulties that are difficult to reach just on those basic 2 dice. But the choice the system provides is more, this test is difficult, how much effort do I want to put into it to succeed, rather than this test is difficult, am I going to be lucky?
It reminds me of a saying that I once heard with regard, I forget which game system, but it was in a game book, and it said, every human being has the strength to lift a car once.
Yes, it's that sort of, it's how much of a cost you're willing to pay rather than just are you lucky. And I think that provides a really interesting dynamic for players, not just for players to get to grips with the mechanics, and not just with the story. It kind of mirrors, it kind of matches the two elements, and that's kind of what I'm interested in terms of games anyway.
How has combat been tailored for the Conan system? Like, what's combat going to be like?
We've tried to strike a balance between giving players the means to take risks and dive headlong into danger as befits Conan and his ilk, without making it so that characters are indestructible, as there might be in games where you just escalate how many hit points you have. All of the characters' abilities to receive damage are split into 2 broad categories. You've got your stress, things like your vigor and your resolve for physical and mental harm, respectively. And then you've got the actual harm that you can suffer if things go too badly. Stress comes back fairly quickly. You can rest and recover a little bit of it during a fight. Take a moment's breather hidden behind a wall, away from arrows incoming, and it comes back at the end of a fight with a few minutes rest naturally. You take more severe damage. You suffer some serious injury or massive trauma, and that will take more time and more effort to recover from. Because you've got that balance between something that doesn't cause you any problem when you lose it and comes back quickly, but you haven't got much of it. You've got enough leeway to take risks and leap into the fray without everything becoming too easy. You can still get hurt if you're not careful, if you're not wary, or if you're not skilled enough.
It also seems like that might help in encounter balancing in the situation I'm dealing with right now, where I have one game where I've only got 2 players. So I want them to get involved in combats, but when they do, I have to be really careful not to kill them, because that's not what I'm trying to do.
Being able to, it helps take the edge off that risk and does mean that the GM can push that little bit harder. One thing that we found I've certainly found during my own testing, is that in any 2d20 system game, the GM has a lot more room to push harder on the players and give them some serious challenges than might be the case in other games. Because the player characters can handle a lot more than it looks like they can handle.
And why is that?
Amongst other things, it's the flexibility, it's the number of options they've got for increasing the size of their the number of dice rolling, and attempt things that are otherwise quite difficult at some kind of cost. You have a variety of options. If you've got built up momentum from a successful skill test in previous rounds, or if you're willing to let the GM gain some doom to and face the consequences later, you can boost your dice pool and take on those challenges that you might not otherwise be able to face. That gives player characters, even starting player characters, a lot of potential ability, as long as the players are willing to embrace it.
Okay, and so it seems like with giving a lot more options for starting characters, so how does that balance out with as characters progress, as they go on adventures, etc.? How do they develop? The
development tends to be more in terms of breadth. If you specialise to begin with, you'll have a few skills that you're really good at. But developing further, you might pick up a rank or two in other skills just to kind of round you out and shore up some of your weaknesses. You might be able to specialise further, work your way down the talent trees, and hone your skills up to closer to their upper limits. The differences aren't massive, but they're still noticeable. And amongst other things, characters will become more consistent. Those dice are more likely to turn into successes. So you can try things with less resource expenditure, less risk of later consequences, less use of momentum.
And with very skilled characters, I mean, do you find that there's a point? Does it ever get like high level play in some other games where you seem to run out of options as a game master for challenging the players, and then you stop and start over at the beginning?
Not that I've seen in my own play experiences, or I've seen in feedback. The things that you encounter as a starting character can still challenge you. You might need to include a few more of them to stop them all being cut down before they get a chance to strike. But you never grow out of being threatened by those bandits or thugs or the raiders from the next village over. You're more capable of handling them, but a lucky blow or that decisive strike can still lay you low. You can just be that little bit more ambitious with what you try and face down.
And what sort of adversaries do you have in the game, basically?
With Conan, it could be anything from humans from different nations and different cultures. People of different ideologies and different goals, right up to the varying primordial monsters and wild animals of the world, to Lovecraftian horrors from beyond the edges of space, and everything in between. And the rules kind of tailor that to different levels of adversary, so that you do have things that you can cut down in a single strike to show off how powerful you are, and which are probably likely to reach you in mobs and hordes, up to creatures where it takes several of you to lay down to defeat a single one of them, or which require cunning strategies and sneaky tricks to defeat them, such as the dragon from Conan's own stories.
Okay, yeah, for it to be Conan, there definitely have to be enemies, massive enemies that you can wade through, maybe in a scene or something like that, as soon as you enter the fortress or something. Okay, so when it comes to being the game master and coming up with challenges for the players, a lot of times you've got your book in front of you, your prepared notes, and so you've got the challenges laid out and you just introduce them. But sometimes, as we all know, the game goes off the rails or in a different direction, and you need to come up with a threat, like kind of off the top of your head. How do you do that in this game?
What we've got beyond the GM's main purpose, kind of freeform, in a freeform sense, is setting the scene. The players enter a new situation, and the GM describes what's there, as you do as is done in every other game out there. You describe what sort of adversaries are there, what sort of terrain, and what sort of environment is around, what the potential hazards might be. During that individual scene, the GM's tool and limit in equal measure is the Doom Pool, as it is in Conan, which means that because it's partly fed by the players' actions, the players get to choose how much pushback the GM is able to give. So the system kind of regulates itself in that way. But how the GM chooses to use that resource is entirely on a case-by-case basis. If you find the players are cutting through the guards of your sorcerer's fortress far too quickly, spend a pile of doom on bringing in more guards drawn in by the sounds of the violence. Even spend actions from other guards, literally just calling for help, and put the doom that comes from that, to use bringing in reinforcements. You can get the guards by fighting harder or setting up ambushes or various things that take advantage of this flexible resource to tailor the situation to what's happening there and then, rather than just what's happening in a broad sense.
So is the Doom Pool in addition to whatever starting challenges and threats I had placed in my scenario, like 10 guards at the front gate or something?
Yeah. Though lots of scenarios, pre-written scenarios, may have specific lists of ways that we suggest you use Doom in this situation. You might find that if you're travelling along a crumbling cliff face, the GM might choose to spend a couple of points of Doom to have it crumble at that particular moment, just as you're scrambling across it. To make things more difficult, or a fog might descend, or that's the moment where giant vultures decide to swoop down upon you and take you for their lunch.
Okay, so how do I construct just a quick, simple example scenario in terms of the forces arrayed against the players at the outset? Let's say I have 5 minutes to design an encounter.
The simplest part of that would normally be the adversaries. You want to try and have the player characters outnumbered a little bit, simply because the way the turn order works, the player characters will go first in each round, and then the NPCs act. So you want to have enough extra adversaries to make sure that the players don't cut down all of them before you get a chance to act. In terms of the common level of foe, maybe 1.5 times as many NPCs as you have player characters, and then you can trade some of those up for weaker foes in groups, or for trade it up a few for a stronger foe, that a monstrous opponent or a powerful leader that is worth several opponents by himself.
Okay.
Beyond that, it's a matter of you figure out the area where the fight's going on and divide it into fairly rough, arbitrary zones. Normally, I tend to work on particular terrain features. So if you're if you're fighting through a forest, you might have several zones that represent different clusters of trees, and then one big empty zone in the middle that's a clearing. And the clearing zone is larger and more open because it's faster to get across and it's easier to see across. And the smaller zones around the outside are that much denser and more difficult to see through and move through. But if you can identify them by particular terrain features, you can go, oh, well, my character's over by that cart, or next to the signpost, or by the well, or standing by the hearth, or whatever, something that you can describe in real language, rather than, well, this target is 35 feet away.
Okay, yeah. So he's in the tall grass, he's in the trees, this kind of thing. All right.
It's the kind of thing you could probably put it together either in your head in a few seconds, or on a rough sketch map put together in 30 seconds. If you want to come up with something more elaborate, there's plenty of opportunity to do so. And I've certainly had fun coming up with more elaborate maps for Infinity and Mutant Chronicles games that play up the tactical potential of that kind of mapping. with different routes to the objective and different types of terrain and obstacles and challenges along the way. But if you just want something simple, you can, you're fighting your way through a building. Each room is a zone, because that's a really easy way to delineate it.
Okay, and I like the fact that, for busy people, the encounter design seems fairly simple. So adversaries are basically 1.5, whatever the players are, and then you add to the...
Yeah.
And then the Doom gets added to that. Doom, that's your additional resource. So it seems like a nice rule of thumb if you're just, while somebody's in the bathroom, I'm coming up with the next encounter.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's still room to do more than that and go into a lot more detail if you want to. It's
sure.
Not limiting you just to that basic level.
We've all had those games, though, where it's like, you finish work at 6 o'clock and people are coming over to the house at 6:45.
Yes, where you just have to run with it and wing everything. Yeah, I've had plenty of those. Honestly, some of my best sessions are I've come to this with exactly no planning, and I'll just run with it.
Well, less can be more. I mean, all you pretty much need to do is, you have a hostage, you have a few guards, and, a leader, and a big fire. You've already got something there. So, it's what the players do is the interesting part, I suppose.
Yes, yeah. So,
I guess if we sort of in closing, how would you say there have already been 2 iterations of Conan in terms of role-playing games? The TSR original classic box set Conan, and also the Mongoose Publishing Conan books, which are now outrageous amounts of money on eBay, but really nicely done. How would you say this game is different from those? Because I guess those are what people know. So how will this be distinct?
Those are both very traditional, very D&D-esque in the way that they run, and that's fine for a lot of people. I've got nothing against that particular style of play. I enjoy that style of play myself from time to time. What I'd say we're providing here is something different in terms of the way the mechanics flow. Something that focuses a lot more on the storytelling aspect of gaming rather than just the procedural. You're attacking this person, roll to hit. Kind of elements that traditional gaming tends to focus on and leave all the narration up to the GM. And obviously, on the story side of things, we're focusing exclusively on the original Howard works rather than anything beyond that or anything that's come after that. I think that particular combination of this is expressly Robert E. Howard's Conan, and that element of this is a narrative, high impact, high action system. It's an interesting combination, and it's not a combination that we've had before. If we're coming up with a new Conan game, why not make it a different Conan game to what people have already had? If they already like those previous Conan, they've still got them. If they want to try something different, we've got this now as well.
And for people who maybe only have experience with the procedural style of game, what advice do you have for them, or how should they look at this different style of play?
I personally tend to find that looking at different styles of play, even if you look at styles of play that you don't necessarily find you don't necessarily like those styles of play, it's still useful to look at them and see what they do and see how they do it. Just kind of broadens your experience of gaming. 2D20, it diverges from that kind of traditional format in a number of ways, but not massively so that it's unrecognisable to a lot of people that might only have experience of 1 or 2 fairly traditional games.
Is there anything else you'd like to add about the game?
I'm massively proud to be considering. I've only been working in the RPG industry for a few years, and to be involved in a big project like this so heavily is, it's a massive source of pride, particularly where I've got a lot of fairly important decisions to make, and seeing positive feedback coming back through the internet, through the Kickstarter and things like that, it's massively gratifying to see that I'm managing to, I'm getting to do something that means that people have fun.
Okay, Nathan, thanks very much for all of that, and I know I'm excited to see the game come out and have the book in my hot little hands and spend the weekend reading it. So, well, good luck to you.
Yes, yeah. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.